You see, on trips to school in Otta, I had always noticed different kinds of activities extending from homes. These extensions spilled onto the streets. And so the streets had become this sort of urban marketplace, but also an urban living room. But this is how I had known the city to operate. It had simply become the backdrop of my everyday life. So I had never really thought to ask, why was every street now a marketplace? Why was every street now an urban living room? And why were people not at marketplaces? And I'm sure we all know this kind of streets everywhere we live. But this journey to this question started 20 years ago. I was on a trip to the airport. And on this trip to the airport, I met a building shaped like a ship. And for a child of less than 10 years old, this was simply breathtaking. I mean, I just knew that this was the kind of feeling I wanted to create when I got older. I didn't know what that meant or how to create that kind of feeling. So my father took me to an architect. And that conversation and meeting shaped the course of what was going to become my life's work. So it was a bit of a disappointment when I got into university and I realized that I wasn't really interested in designing buildings that looked like ships or cars or planes. Instead, I wanted to engage with my context. I wanted to reflect, shape, advocate the spaces where majority of people lived. And so I was here with this big question in my mind. If this condition that arises out of survival and is a response to inequality in urban living is everywhere, why hasn't it affected how we begin to shape cities? And so for the past 6 years, and recently through the design group I founded, Omi Collective, I have been investigating ideas invoked by other publics in Lagos. These ideas you might know through different names: informality, economy as resistance, others, being as resistance, otherwise, imagination as resistance, pidgin and pidginization, language as resistance. Altogether, these ideas evoke ideas around resistance. And at the heart of contemporary resistance in urbanizing African cities is this idea of informality. And so I had tested these ideas out in Ibadan. I tested it out in housing. We designed spaces that could shift from workspaces in the daytime to resting spaces at night. We learned from how informal actors had extended and expanded housing frameworks, but more importantly, what home meant for them. And you see, finally, COVID came. And when COVID came, these ideas that were engineered through informality became evident. Adaptability was no longer a choice, it was a necessity. And so when we got to the Medina of Fez in Morocco, we learned from how informality was using the walls as a site for commercialization. And we leaned into that and thought about how could we re-engineer this, but instead, this time, for play. And so we developed simple ideas and simple infrastructure that, together with the children, could evolve. We leaned on incompleteness, itinerancy, and adaptability to allow these games and play evolve in the system. And so when we came back to Lagos, we turned our eyes towards the informal detritus of water stress. You see, in Lagos, more than 70% of families and plots lack state-supplied water. The result of this is that we all have to have steel water tanks, overhead tanks, as we call them. But these overhead tanks supply us with around 80 square meters of surface area. And so we started to think, what can we do with that surface area? Imagine if this surface area began to be rewilded. Edible plants, beautification plants, but also air purifying plants. What could this do for Lagos? And so we applied this thinking to a site like Shomolu with around 16,000 plots over 10 square kilometers, what we realized that applying this thinking could give us around 128 hectares of green area. The result of this is bringing down the microclimate by around 2 degrees Celsius, but also contributing towards feeding and local diets. And now, I'm turning my focus towards memory. You see, urbanizing African cities are confronted with entangled streams of violence that are unresolved. What this does is deepen social fractures. And in this context, memory is a site where justice can be sought. And in architecture, especially so. And so, I'm interested in thinking, how can informality, these adaptable, itinerant ideas, re-engineer how we inhabit and experience memory in the past, the present, and the future? You see, this is advocacy by design. Informal urbanism is laden with a lot of intelligence. It offers us ideas in sustainability, adaptability, and resilience. If we engineer these ideas onto cities, we're able to engineer cities that are adaptable and flexible. But this comes with a realization. We cannot design for informality. But what we can do is to design with it. And by doing so, maybe we might be able to take people out of the system that has continued to entrap most of us in iniquity and finally find justice. Thank you.